Hey Grace Church, my name is Josh. This is the week of March 20th. Welcome to the Weekly. Today we are talking about Jesus calling disciples to himself. So last week we looked at 6 stories in a row where Jesus challenges us and refuses to be put in our boxes. And we said that a Jesus that doesn't challenge you is a Jesus that doesn't change you. But there's good news. This story of following Jesus is not a story of only challenge. It's also a story of deep invitation. And we see that in Mark chapter 3, where the crowds are gathering around Jesus. He has to actually get on a boat because so many people are following him. And then in Mark chapter 3, verse 13, it says, Jesus went up on the mountainside and he called to himself those he wanted. He called to himself those he wanted. That powerful moment of Jesus calling to himself the disciples is a microcosm of what has happened across all of the universal church. So the calling of the 12 disciples comes from the crowd, which puts us in this juxtaposition of the crowds who come to Jesus for what he offers them, but he's not interested in them coming to him for what he provides. He's actually interested in calling disciples to himself, because the provision is not the miracle. The provision is his person, his character, who he is what he calls him to. So the first thing we wanted to say is that Jesus calls you out from the crowd to himself. And you become a student, not of some law or even the Torah. He calls the disciples to be a student of himself. And that's where we get our power from. And then the next verse, it says, he appointed the 12 who he had called to himself, that they might go and preach and have authority to drive out demons and fulfill the mission of God. And so this put us in a place where we spent the rest of our time talking about emotionally healthy spirituality is one way to frame it, where Jesus never asks you to do stuff for him before you receive from him. And so this is the truth we looked at, that Jesus calls us primarily to get our power from him, or to say it a different way, we are to be formed by Jesus before we do work for Jesus. We're to be formed by him before we do work for him. And this is the story of discipleship. It's the story of being so near to Jesus that you take on his personhood, you take on his character, you take on his bravery, you take on his prayer life. You are formed by him. And from that formation, this is so key, the being with Jesus is where you get your authority to go do work for Jesus. And so in a post-Christian world where people aren't going to be drawn to church as much as they used to, the mission of God is going forward on the shoulders of Christians who have been with Jesus. So as you go into the workplace, as you go into the coffee shop or the gym, wherever you find yourself, the most compelling thing you can offer the world around you is a life that is spent with Jesus, a life that has been formed by Jesus. And people at your workplace or people around you might start to say things like, man, you have good vibes, or man, you're really kind, or man, I have something about you I like. And what they're experiencing is the presence of the Holy Spirit, the presence of a life formed by Jesus working its way out in the world. And so Grace Church, that's the challenge for us. Don't feel compelled to go work for Jesus without having spent time with Jesus. So maybe take some time to ask your Connect group or the people around you, how are you being deeply formed by Jesus right now? What's going on under the water of the iceberg that Jesus is working on? I know that's a vulnerable question, but there's a lot of things happening above the water that people see. My question is, what's going on beneath the surface of the water that Jesus is forming inside of you? So what's going on under the surface that Jesus is forming in you? And then secondly, who are the people in your life that you're walking with family closeness? The disciples lived in family closeness. They shared things. They lived life together. Who are you walking with in family closeness? Is it your Connect group? Is it people in maybe another part of the church? But who has access to your life? Who can open your refrigerator and eat your food and that not be weird at all? And if you find yourself saying, man, underneath the water level of my life, it's hard to know what's going on. People in my life I'm connected with, it's hard to say that I have those people. What's the first step you need to take to find people that would walk with you and help you be transformed by Jesus? Lastly, this picture in Mark chapter 3 actually shows up again in the book of Acts when the disciples are continuing the mission of Jesus after the resurrection. And there's this powerful scene where they're brought before the religious leaders, the same religious leaders that crucified Jesus or that sent him to be crucified. And the disciples get made fun of. They say, these are uneducated men. But there's one thing we can't deny. These men have been with Jesus. And so you see in the book of Acts that the power of having spent time with Jesus is the place where they get their authority to do the mission of Jesus. And so this is no small thing we're talking about. If we're going to be a church on mission, doing the Great Commission, living out the mission of Jesus, then we can't just be a church doing the work of Jesus. We have to be a church that spends time being formed by Jesus. You don't work for him without being formed by him. That's the tension that we want to walk in as a church. We want to pair these two things together. So thank you for checking into the weekly. We love you, Grace Church. We'll see you on Sunday.